The little dragon brought vegetables to a human cook. Please, my mother is ill. The little dragon brought vegetables to a human cook. Please, my mother is ill. Jake Murphy was stirring a pot of stew when the kitchen window exploded inward. Glass scattered across the floor as a creature no bigger than a house cat tumbled through, wings flapping desperately. The thing crashed into a stack of pans with a metallic clatter that sent his heart racing. Jake grabbed the nearest weapon, a cast-iron skillet, and raised it high. The creature untangled itself from the cookware and looked up at him. It was a dragon. An actual dragon with emerald scales that caught the afternoon light, tiny horns barely longer than his thumb, and eyes that gleamed with intelligence and desperation. The dragon's mouth opened, and instead of fire, words came out in a high, trembling voice. Please, please help me. My mother is dying. Jake froze with the skillet still raised above his head. Dragons were supposed to be myths, stories told around campfires to scare children. Yet here one stood in his kitchen, speaking perfect English and begging for help. What are you talking about? Jake lowered the skillet slowly, his pulse still hammering in his ears. The little dragon spread its wings, and Jake noticed they were torn in places, membrane stretched thin between delicate bones. My mother ate something poisonous 3 days ago. She burns with fever, her scales are turning black. I've tried everything from our healing caves, but nothing works. Then I remembered the stories. What stories? The old tales say humans can cure anything, that you're too stubborn to let death win, that you turn plants into medicine and make miracles from dirt and water. The dragon's voice cracked with emotion. I brought vegetables from the deep forest, the rarest ones. Please, you have to try. The dragon reached into a small leather pouch strapped to its chest and pulled out vegetables Jake had never seen before. They glowed with a faint bioluminescence, colors shifting from purple to blue to green. One looked like a radish but pulsed with an inner heartbeat. Another resembled a carrot if carrots were made of living crystal. I can't just... Jake started, but the dragon's eyes were filling with tears. She's all I have. My father was killed by hunters last year. My brothers and sisters never hatched. It's just us, and she's dying. The little dragon's voice dropped to a whisper. I flew for 2 days straight to find a human settlement. You're my last hope. Jake set the skillet down on the counter. His rational mind screamed that this was insane, that dragons weren't real, that he couldn't possibly help. But his hands were already reaching for the strange vegetables. He'd spent 15 years perfecting his craft, learning which herbs cured stomach ailments, which roots brought down fevers, which leaves could fight infection. Tell me her symptoms. Everything. The dragon's expression shifted from despair to desperate hope. High fever. Black scales spreading from her belly. She can't eat. Water comes back up. She sleeps but doesn't rest. Sometimes she doesn't recognize me. Jake's mind raced through possibilities. It sounded like severe poisoning with systemic infection. He grabbed a knife and began examining the vegetables the dragon had brought. If these came from a dragon's natural habitat, they might have properties that worked on dragon biology in ways earth plants never could. What did she eat that poisoned her? A deer. But it had been eating silver flowers from the cursed meadow. Silver flowers. Jake didn't know what those were, but if they were toxic to dragons, he needed to work fast. He started chopping the glowing vegetables, his trained hands moving with practiced precision. The crystal carrot released a scent like mint and lightning. The pulsing radish bled a golden sap. How far is your home? An hour's flight for me. Maybe 3 hours if I carry you? Jake looked at the tiny dragon, then at himself. You can't carry me. I'm 10 times your size. The dragon's scales rippled, and suddenly it wasn't so small anymore. It grew to the size of a large dog, muscles bulging beneath emerald scales. I can manage. I have to. Jake grabbed his emergency medical kit and a thermos. He poured the sap from the radish into the container along with shavings from the crystal carrot. Let's go. We'll make the real medicine when we get there with proper heat and mixing. But this might help her hold on. The dragon's eyes blazed with gratitude and determination. Thank you. Thank you. I'll remember this forever. Jake climbed onto the dragon's back, gripping tight to the small horns. The creature's scales were warm beneath him, and he could feel the powerful muscles bunching as wings spread wide. They launched through the broken window into the sky, and Jake's stomach lurched as the ground fell away. He'd made a choice. Now he had to see it through. Jake clung to the dragon's horns as they soared over the forest canopy. Wind whipped at his face, stinging his eyes and making them water. The medical kit bounced against his hip, and he prayed nothing inside had broken during their chaotic launch through the window. What's your name? Jake shouted over the rushing air. Ember, the dragon called back. My mother is Skyfire. She's the last of the Crimson Wing clan. The weight of that statement settled on Jake's shoulders. If Skyfire died, an entire bloodline would vanish from the world. He tightened his grip and focused on staying mounted as Ember banked hard to the left, diving between two massive pine trees that appeared out of nowhere. They flew deeper into wilderness than Jake had ever ventured. The trees grew taller here, their trunks wider than his kitchen. Mist clung to the ground in patches, and he spotted creatures moving below that definitely weren't deer or bears. Something with 6 legs and antlers that branched like lightning bolts. A cat the size of a truck with fur that shifted colors to match its surroundings. How much farther? Jake's arms were starting to ache from holding on. Soon. Very soon. We're almost to the Dragon Peaks. Mountains rose ahead, jagged and sharp against the sky. Ember climbed higher, and the air grew thin and cold. Jake's lungs burned with each breath. They crested a ridge, and suddenly he could see into a hidden valley that maps would never show. A cave entrance yawned in the mountainside, large enough to swallow a house. Ember angled toward it, wings folding slightly as they glided through the opening into darkness. Jake's eyes struggled to adjust. Then Ember's scales began to glow with soft light, illuminating their surroundings. The cave was massive, with walls that sparkled with embedded crystals. But Jake's attention locked onto the dragon lying in the center. Skyfire was enormous compared to Ember, easily the size of a small airplane. Her scales, which should have been deep red like burning coals, were indeed turning black. The discoloration spread across her belly and up her sides like spilled ink. Ember landed beside his mother with surprising gentleness. Jake slid off, his legs shaky from the flight. Up close, Skyfire's condition was even worse than he'd imagined. Her breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps. Heat radiated from her body in waves that made sweat instantly bead on Jake's forehead. "Mom," Ember whispered, pressing his snout against her massive head. "Mom, I brought help. A human. Like in the old stories." Skyfire's eyes cracked open, revealing pupils that had turned milky white. She tried to focus on Jake, but seemed unable to track his movement. A weak rumble came from her throat. Jake dropped to his knees beside her and opened his medical kit. His hands moved automatically, checking her pulse at the neck. It was racing, far too fast. He pulled out a thermometer, then realized it wouldn't work on dragon biology. Instead, he placed his palm against her scales. The heat was intense, definitely fever level. "Tell me exactly what she ate and when." Ember's voice shook as he recounted the timeline. 3 days ago at dawn, she caught a deer near the cursed meadow. We didn't know it had been eating silver flowers until after. By noon, she was vomiting. By evening, the black scales appeared. She hasn't eaten since. Water won't stay down. Jake examined the black scales more closely. They weren't just discolored. They were dying. The tissue beneath was inflamed and hot to the touch. The silver flowers must have released a toxin that was systematically shutting down her body. He needed to stop the spread, bring down the fever, and get nutrients into her system. "The vegetables you brought. Do you have more?" "Yes, many more. In the storage chamber." Ember bounded away and returned moments later, dragging a sack that clinked and rustled. He dumped it out, revealing dozens of the strange, glowing plants. Jake sorted through them quickly. The crystal carrots, the pulsing radishes, something that looked like a luminescent potato, another that resembled broccoli made of silver threads, and a fruit that smelled like cinnamon and starlight. He pointed at Ember. "I need fire. Controlled fire. Can you do that?" "Of course." Ember opened his mouth, and a thin stream of flame shot out, blue at its core. "Good. Hold it steady right here." Jake arranged flat stones into a makeshift cooking surface. He grabbed the crystal carrots and began shaving them into thin strips. Then the golden sap from the radishes went into his thermos. He crushed the luminescent potato until it released a white paste. "What are you making?" Ember kept the flame steady, his young voice tight with fear. A compound that should neutralize the toxin and something to bring her fever down. "These vegetables from your world probably evolved alongside dragons. They'll work better than anything from my kitchen." Jake worked with focused intensity, mixing ingredients based on instinct and 15 years of cooking experience. The crystal carrot strips began to caramelize over the heat, releasing that scent of mint and lightning. Jake added the white paste from the potato, and it sizzled, transforming into a thick gel. He poured in the golden radish sap, and the mixture turned amber, then deep orange, then began to glow with its own light. "This is crazy," Jake muttered to himself. "I'm making medicine from magic vegetables for a dying dragon." But his hands never stopped moving. He added shavings from the silver broccoli, and the mixture darkened, taking on metallic sheen. Finally, he squeezed juice from the cinnamon starlight fruit directly into the concoction. The liquid hissed and steamed, but when the vapor cleared, what remained was a thick, golden syrup that pulsed with inner warmth. Jake carefully poured the syrup into a bowl. "Ember, stop the flame." The fire cut off instantly. Jake carried the bowl to Skyfire's massive head. "We need to get this into her. Can you help me?" Together they pried open Skyfire's jaws. Her teeth were as long as Jake's forearm, sharp as swords. He tried not to think about how easily she could bite him in half. Instead, he tilted the bowl and poured the golden syrup down her throat. Skyfire's body convulsed. Her eyes shot wide open, pupils contracting to slits. For a terrifying moment, Jake thought he'd poisoned her further. Then she coughed, a great heaving sound that echoed through the cave, and swallowed. The black scales on her belly stopped spreading. Jake watched, hardly daring to breathe as the discoloration seemed to pause, holding steady. It wasn't receding, but it wasn't getting worse. "It's working," Ember whispered. Look at her eyes." The milky film was starting to clear. Skyfire's pupils were regaining their color, shifting from white to gold. Her breathing, while still labored, had lost that horrible rattling quality. But Jake knew this was just the first step. The toxin had stopped spreading, but the damage was already done. Skyfire's body was still fighting a massive infection, and her fever remained dangerously high. He needed to bring her temperature down and help her body repair the dying tissue. "I need cold water. Lots of it. And more of those vegetables." Ember didn't hesitate. He dashed out of the cave and returned minutes later, dragging a massive leaf filled with crystal-clear water. From the mountain spring. It's ice cold. Jake grabbed the luminescent potatoes and crushed 3 of them into the water. The paste dissolved, turning the water a pale blue. He soaked cloths from his medical kit in the mixture and began laying them across Skyfire's black scales. Steam rose where the cloths touched her fevered skin. Skyfire groaned, a sound so deep Jake felt it in his bones. But she didn't pull away. She seemed to understand he was trying to help. "Talk to her," Jake instructed Ember. "Keep her calm. Let her know what's happening." Ember pressed close to his mother's head, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. Jake continued working, replacing the warm cloths with fresh, cold ones, focusing on the areas where the black scales were thickest. Slowly, gradually, he felt Skyfire's temperature beginning to drop. Hours passed. Jake lost track of time, focused entirely on his patient. He mixed more of the golden syrup and got Skyfire to swallow 2 more doses. He kept the cold compresses coming, cycling them constantly. Ember helped without complaint, fetching water and vegetables, maintaining small flames when Jake needed to heat new mixtures. Finally, as exhaustion was starting to drag at Jake's bones, Skyfire's eyes fully opened. The gold color had returned completely, and intelligence gleamed in their depths. She looked at Jake, really looked at him, and understanding passed between them. "You came," she said, her voice weak but clear. "A human came to save a dragon." Jake sat back on his heels, suddenly aware of how much his muscles ached. "Your son was very persuasive." Skyfire's gaze shifted to Ember, and the love in that look was unmistakable. "My brave little flame, you saved me." "The human saved you," Ember corrected. "I just brought him here. You both saved me." Skyfire tried to lift her head but couldn't quite manage it. "I owe you a debt, human, one that can never be fully repaid." Jake waved a hand dismissively. "Just focus on getting better. You're not out of danger yet. The black scales are still there. Your body needs time to heal." Over the next several days, Jake became a fixture in the Dragon's Cave. He'd sent word to his restaurant to a very confused hiker who'd agreed to deliver a message after Jake promised him a year of free meals. The hiker had agreed, probably thinking Jake had lost his mind. Skyfire's recovery was slow but steady. The black scales had stopped spreading entirely, and gradually they were beginning to regain hints of their original crimson color. Jake continued treating her with medicines made from the forest vegetables, adjusting his recipes based on how she responded to each dose. During the quiet hours, he learned about dragons. Skyfire told him of the old days, when her kind had been numerous, filling the skies in great flights that darkened the sun. She spoke of the wars with humans, conflicts born from misunderstanding and fear on both sides. She described how dragon numbers had dwindled as humans spread across the land, pushing them into ever more remote territories. "We're not so different, your kind and mine," Skyfire said one evening, as Jake prepared her medication. "We both love our families. We both fight to protect our homes. We both fear extinction." Jake paused in his mixing. "I never thought I'd be having philosophical discussions with a dragon," I never thought I'd be saved by a human cook. Skyfire's laugh was like distant thunder. The universe has a sense of humor. Ember had appointed himself as Jake's assistant, learning everything he could about human medicine and cooking. The young dragon proved to be a quick student, memorizing which vegetables did what and how to prepare them. He asked endless questions about human society, human food, human customs. "Why do humans cook their food?" Ember asked one afternoon. "We dragons eat things raw." Jake smiled. Cooking started as a way to make food safer and easier to digest, but it became something more. It became art, a way to bring people together. Some of my best memories are of sharing meals with friends and family. Dragons don't really do that, Ember said thoughtfully. We mostly eat alone. Maybe that's something that could change. On the 5th day, Skyfire managed to stand. It was a struggle, and she only stayed upright for a few minutes before exhaustion forced her back down, but it was progress. Jake felt a surge of pride watching her move. His makeshift medicine was working. It actually cured a dragon with vegetables and cooking skills. That night, as Jake prepared to sleep on a pile of moss Ember had gathered for him, Skyfire called him over. Her voice was stronger now, though still not at full power. "Jake Murphy, you've given me back my life. In dragon culture, that creates a bond that cannot be broken. You are now and forever clan to me and mine." Jake wasn't sure what that meant exactly, but the solemnity in Skyfire's voice told him it was important. "I'm honored. More than honor. It's responsibility and protection. No dragon will ever harm you, and should you ever need us, we will come." Skyfire's eyes gleamed in the dim cave light. "But I must ask something difficult of you. What is it? You cannot tell other humans about us. Not yet, not while we're so few. The world isn't ready for dragons to return. Too many would see us as threats, as monsters to be destroyed or prizes to be captured." Jake thought about the media circus that would erupt if word got out about dragons, the hunters who would come, the scientists who would want to study them, the governments who would want to control them. Skyfire was right. The world wasn't ready. "I won't tell anyone," Jake promised. "Your secret is safe." "Thank you." Skyfire settled her head down, looking more at peace than she had since Jake arrived. "You're a good human, Jake Murphy. Perhaps there's hope for both our kinds yet." The next morning, Skyfire insisted on trying to fly. Jake protested, arguing she wasn't strong enough, but the dragon was determined. With Ember's help, she made her way to the cave entrance. The black scales on her belly had faded to dark gray, and her movements, while still stiff, showed increasing strength. Skyfire spread her wings. They were magnificent, spanning at least 50 feet from tip to tip, membranes the color of sunset. She crouched, muscles bunching, and then launched herself into the air. For a horrible moment, Jake thought she would fall. Her wings seemed to struggle for purchase in the thin mountain air. But then she caught a thermal updraft and soared, climbing higher and higher. Her roar of triumph echoed across the valley, a sound of pure joy and defiance. Ember shot into the air beside his mother, smaller but just as exuberant. The two dragons circled the valley 3 times before gliding back to the cave entrance. Skyfire landed with surprising grace, and though she was breathing hard from the exertion, her eyes blazed with life. "I can fly," she said simply. "Thanks to you, I can fly again." Jake had to wipe his eyes. He wasn't usually emotional, but watching Skyfire reclaim her strength moved something deep inside him. "You did the hard part. You fought. You survived. We survived together. Human and dragon. That's worth remembering." Before Jake left that day, Ember gave him a gift. It was a scale, one of Ember's own, emerald green and no bigger than a silver dollar. "Keep this," the young dragon said. "If you ever need us, hold it tight and call my name. I'll hear you no matter where I am." Jake tucked the scale carefully into his pocket. "Take care of your mother." "I will." "And Jake? Thank you for not giving up on us." The flight back to Jake's restaurant was bittersweet. He clung to Ember's horns as they soared through the sky one last time, watching the dragon peaks disappear behind them. When they landed in the alley behind his kitchen, Ember shifted back to a smaller size. "Remember," Ember said, "your clan now. Forever." Then the little dragon was gone, wings carrying him back toward the mountains and home. Jake stood alone in the alley, the emerald scale warm against his palm through the fabric of his pocket. His kitchen window was still broken, a reminder that the last few days had actually happened. He went inside and looked at the damage. Glass everywhere. Overturned pans. His stew had long since burned to the bottom of the pot, but Jake found himself smiling as he began to clean up. He'd saved a life. He'd made friends with dragons. He'd proven that humans and dragons could work together, could trust each other. The world might not be ready to know about dragons yet, but Jake knew. And he'd carry that secret proudly, along with the knowledge that somewhere in the mountains, 2 dragons flew free because a human had chosen compassion over fear. He picked up his phone and called his insurance company. Explaining the broken window was going to be interesting. 3 months passed. Jake's life returned to normal, or at least what passed for normal after he'd saved a dragon's life. He fixed his window, compensated the hiker who delivered his message with a generous gift certificate, and went back to running his restaurant. But everything felt different now. Smaller, somehow. Less significant. He kept Ember's scale in his pocket at all times, occasionally taking it out to look at when he was alone. It never lost its luster, always gleaming with that otherworldly emerald light. Sometimes, late at night when the restaurant was closed, he'd hold it and wonder what Skyfire and Ember were doing. He hoped they were well. He hoped they'd found peace in their hidden valley. Then came the fire. It started in an apartment building 6 blocks from Jake's restaurant. Faulty wiring, the news would later report. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the upper floors were engulfed in flames. Jake heard the sirens and stepped outside to see smoke billowing into the evening sky. The crowd that gathered was typical of such disasters, people standing around with phones out, filming and murmuring. Jake was about to head back inside when he heard a child screaming from a 4th-floor window. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, trapped behind glass and flames. The firefighters were trying to get a ladder up, but the building's facade was partially collapsed, blocking easy access. The fire was spreading fast. Too fast. Jake could see it in the firefighters' faces. They weren't going to reach her in time. Without thinking, Jake pulled out Ember's scale. He clutched it tight in his fist and closed his eyes. "Ember," he whispered. "I need you, please." For a long moment, nothing happened. Jake's heart sank. Maybe the scale was just symbolic. Maybe Ember's promise had been optimistic exaggeration. Then he felt the scale grow warm, hot, almost burning. A shadow fell across the street. People gasped and pointed at the sky. Jake looked up and saw 2 shapes descending through the smoke. Ember, grown larger than before, and Skyfire herself, magnificent and terrible in her full glory. The dragons landed in the middle of the street with impacts that cracked pavement. Car alarms went off. People screamed and ran. Someone shouted something about calling the military. But Jake ran forward, waving his arms. "The girl!" he shouted, pointing at the window. "4th floor. We need to get her out." Skyfire's massive head swiveled to look at the burning building, then at Jake. Understanding flashed in her golden eyes. "Stand back," she commanded, her voice carrying over the chaos. She launched herself into the air with a single powerful thrust of her wings. The downdraft knocked Jake backwards into a parked car. Skyfire flew straight at the 4th-floor window, pulling up at the last second and using her tail to smash through the glass and concrete. Her claws gripped the building's edge as she reached inside with careful precision. When she pulled back, the little girl was clutched gently in one massive claw, protected from the flames by Skyfire's own body. The dragon glided down to the street and deposited the child directly into the arms of a firefighter who looked like he was questioning his own sanity. But Skyfire wasn't done. She flew back to the building, and Jake realized there were more people trapped. The dragon moved with incredible speed and precision, pulling victims from windows, carrying them to safety. Ember joined her, smaller but equally effective, rescuing people from the lower floors. The crowd's fear was transforming into something else. Wonder. Amazement. People were still filming, but now they were cheering each time a dragon emerged from the flames with another survivor. Jake watched as centuries of fear and misunderstanding began to crack. In 20 minutes, the dragons had evacuated everyone from the building. 16 people who would have died. The firefighters could only stand and stare as Skyfire made one final pass over the structure, using her wings to create downdrafts that actually helped contain the fire until the hoses could finish the job. When it was over, Skyfire and Ember landed beside Jake. The crowd pressed forward, phones out, questions shouting, but Skyfire's gaze never left Jake's face. "You called?" she said simply. "We came." "You saved them all," Jake managed. His voice was hoarse from smoke and emotion. "We paid our debt." Skyfire looked around at the gathered crowd, at the cameras, at the news helicopters that were now circling overhead, though I suspect we've complicated things considerably. She wasn't wrong. Within an hour, the footage had gone viral. Within 2 hours, it was international news. Within 3 hours, government officials were setting up roadblocks around Jake's neighborhood. By morning, the president was making a statement about the dragon situation. Jake found himself at the center of a media storm he was entirely unprepared for. Reporters camped outside his restaurant. Government agents wanted to interview him. Scientists wanted to study Skyfire and Ember. The military wanted to know if dragons posed a threat. Politicians argued about what rights, if any, dragons should have. Through it all, Skyfire remained calm. She refused to leave Jake's side, settling herself in the large parking lot behind his restaurant and simply waiting. Ember stood guard, growing to his larger size and looking surprisingly intimidating despite his youth. They'd made their choice. They'd revealed themselves. Now they had to deal with the consequences. On the third day after the fire, Jake managed to arrange a press conference. He stood in front of dozens of cameras, with Skyfire and Ember flanking him. His hands were shaking, but his voice stayed steady. 3 months ago, a little dragon came to my kitchen asking for help. His mother was dying, and he believed humans might be able to save her. I was scared. Confused, but I made a choice to help anyway. Jake gestured to Skyfire. This magnificent creature is alive today because we chose cooperation over fear. Because we saw each other not as human and monster, but as people who both wanted the same thing, to save a life. He continued, his confidence growing. Yesterday, these dragons risked exposure, risked everything to save human lives. They could have stayed hidden. They could have remained safe. But when I called for help, they came. They proved that dragons and humans can work together, that we don't have to be enemies. A reporter shouted a question. But what's to stop them from attacking us? They're dangerous. Skyfire spoke before Jake could respond. Her voice boomed across the crowd, commanding and clear. We are dangerous, just as you are dangerous. Just as any creature with strength and intelligence can be dangerous. But danger is not the same as evil. We do not seek war. We seek only to exist, to live, to raise our young in peace. How many dragons are there? Another reporter called out. Few, Skyfire admitted. So few. My clan is gone. I know of perhaps 20 others scattered across remote places. We're dying out, slowly fading from a world that has no room for us anymore. The crowd murmured. Jake saw expressions changing, fear giving way to something else. Not quite acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Then why reveal yourselves now? Someone asked. Why risk it? Ember answered this time, his young voice carrying surprising weight. Because Jake Murphy showed us that humans can change, that you can choose compassion over hatred. That's worth the risk. That's worth fighting for. The press conference went on for 2 more hours. Questions about dragon biology, dragon culture, dragon history. Skyfire answered what she could, explaining how her kind had once filled the skies before retreating in the face of human expansion. She spoke of the wars, taking responsibility for dragon aggression while also noting human brutality. She spoke of the Great Dying, how pollution and habitat loss had devastated dragon populations. By the time it ended, Jake was exhausted, but he noticed something. The way people looked at the dragons had changed. There was still fear, yes, but also curiosity. Wonder. The beginnings of empathy. Over the following weeks, the world grappled with the knowledge that dragons were real. There were protests from groups who wanted dragons destroyed. There were other protests from groups who wanted dragons protected. Religious organizations debated what dragons meant for theology. Scientists clamored for research access. Conspiracy theorists had a field day. But slowly, gradually, a consensus began to form. Dragons were intelligent, sentient beings who deserved rights and protection. The United Nations formed a special committee to establish dragon-human relations protocols. Protected territories were designated where dragons could live without human interference. Jake found himself appointed as a liaison of sorts, helping facilitate communication between human and dragon communities. More dragons emerged from hiding, cautiously making contact. Each meeting was tense, fraught with centuries of mistrust, but progress was made. Skyfire became something of a dragon ambassador, speaking at conferences and meetings. Ember continued his education, learning about human society while teaching humans about dragon culture. They lived part-time in their mountain cave and part-time in a specially constructed shelter near Jake's restaurant. The restaurant itself became something else entirely. Jake started serving food to dragons as well as humans, creating dishes from those magical vegetables that Ember flew in from the deep forest. It became a gathering place, a neutral ground where both species could meet and eat together. One evening, 6 months after the fire, Jake sat outside his restaurant watching the sunset. Skyfire lounged nearby, her scales fully healed and gleaming crimson. Ember was teaching a group of human children how to cook dragon style, showing them how to use their breath to perfectly sear meat. You changed the world, Skyfire said quietly. One act of kindness, and you changed everything. Jake shook his head. We changed it together. You and Ember. You're the ones who risked everything. We all risked something, but you risked first. When Ember crashed through your window, you could have killed him. Instead, you listened. That made all the difference. Skyfire's tail curled around herself in a gesture Jake had learned meant contentment. The old stories were right about humans. You are stubborn. Too stubborn to let death win. Too stubborn to accept that things have to stay the way they've always been. Is that a compliment? The highest compliment a dragon can give. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and red. Jake thought about how his life had changed, how the world had changed. There were still problems, still people who hated and feared dragons, there were still dragons who didn't trust humans, but there was also hope. There was cooperation. There was the possibility of something better. A little dragon, no bigger than a house cat, had crashed through his window asking for help. And in helping, Jake had discovered that the old barriers between species were thinner than anyone imagined, that compassion could bridge gaps that centuries of conflict had created, that sometimes all it took was one person willing to try. "Hey, Jake," Ember called from inside. "The ambassador from Japan is here. She wants to try your dragon curry." Jake stood, brushing off his pants. Back to work. Back to the daily miracle of humans and dragons sharing space, sharing meals, sharing lives. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was real and it was happening, and he'd helped make it possible. "Coming," Jake called back. He glanced at Skyfire. "Want to join us?" "I thought you'd never ask." The great dragon rose and followed him inside, her presence no longer causing panic or fear, just quiet acknowledgement. The world was learning to share its skies again, and in a small restaurant where a cook had once made medicine from magic vegetables, that new world was being built one meal, one conversation, one act of bridge building at a time. Jake smiled as he walked through the door. Behind him, Skyfire's scales caught the last light of day, burning crimson like her name. Above, more dragons circled in the evening sky, no longer hiding, no longer alone. Humanity and dragonkind learning to coexist, learning to thrive together. All because a little dragon had brought vegetables to a human cook and asked for help. And because that human had said yes, the future was uncertain. It always was. But for the first time in centuries, it held possibility for both species. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.